Here we go. This is awesome. Thank you so much for joining us for National Media Literacy Week 2022. I'm Jenny Garman, the Civic Engagement Specialist for the Kansas City Public Library. We're focusing today on how we can use media literacy tools to be an informed voter and talking with local journalists and community partners about reliable sources of information and sharing how to learn more about election security. This presentation is being recorded. Please use the Q&A option at the bottom there to share any questions you might have. We will get to those at the end of the program. We're going to cover a lot of ground in this hour, so you can count on a follow-up email from me with the recording of this presentation and a list of resources that we've mentioned in this webinar. Kansas City Public Library is a proud partner of the National Association for Media Literacy Education. Literacy education is part of our mission to be a doorway of knowledge to all people, and we're really delighted to serve here in Kansas City, Missouri. For those of you new to Media Literacy Week, it's a week-long global celebration of 5 facets of media literacy education: access to necessary tools, technology, and digital skills; analyzing media content, that's talking about authorship and credibility, purpose, technique, and context. And this includes fact-checking, evaluating media content based on what you've accessed and analyzed. Is this a credible source of information? Is this manipulating? Is this propaganda? Creating media content like posting or sharing on social media, or creating visual content to share. And of course, acting, engaging based on what we've accessed, analyzed, and evaluated. This year, we're closing out the week, and the action we're focusing on is voting. I'm grateful to the Kansas City Election Board for their partnership and resources, and to the News Literacy Project for their webinars and resources. If you have questions about examples of misinformation or disinformation, I encourage you to visit newslit.org and sign up for their newsletters, especially Rumor Guard. I'm thrilled to be joined today by an incredible panel of partners. I've asked each of them to introduce themselves and share what they're hearing in their communities and what's on their mind as the November election approaches.
You want somebody to start?
Yes, I actually,
Okay.
Michelle, would you start us off? I sent out the list. Thanks.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No worries. And clearly I didn't pay attention to that list, but I'm here and we'll kick this off. My name is Michelle Watley. I'm the founder of Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet. Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet is a nonpartisan nonprofit named for the one, the only Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman to run for president on a major party ticket, the first Black woman to be elected to Congress. We work to amplify the voices and power of Black women so that they can be better advocates on behalf of the issues that matter to them in the communities they serve. And part of amplifying the voices of Black women is to serve as a conveyor or a resource when it comes to public policy and elections. And so one of the ways that we go about doing that work is to provide information about upcoming elections, making sure Black women know what they need to know to vote, to have their vote count, and that they understand the issues that are being voted on. And so what I'm hearing from the community is what all of us are probably hearing: having to reel and come back from a once in a century pandemic. Voting during the midterm elections often doesn't have the participation that elections during the presidential seasons typically have, but there are very important issues that get decided by voters during midterm elections. So making sure people know the importance of the upcoming elections and making sure people come out is part of our work. We're excited to be here today to talk about media literacy, because media plays a role in helping us decide how we vote and what's important in our understanding of the issues. And I'm happy to be here with the panelists today. Thank you for the invite, Jenny.
I'm sorry, where is the list?
And since I clearly am not the only one that didn't pay attention to the list,
I'm
so
sorry.
I'm going to popcorn it to Laura. How about
Okay.
that?
That's great.
Popcorn it to Laura.
Sorry about that. Hey,
It's
everybody.
okay.
I'm Laura Ziegler with KCUR. I'm a community engagement editor and reporter. And what that means is that we're the public media station in Kansas City, public radio, NPR station, and that means that we are distinguished from commercial radio. We don't have commercials, but we have underwriting. And as community engagement, what we have done is try to define audience first stories, to frame our stories by going out into different communities and listening to people, or bringing stakeholders or a cross section of a particular community or the metro into the station to ask them what we need to be covering, what we're covering wrong, that kind of thing. And in the context of the election, we've done a number of things. As community engagement, we did a partnership with the library, in which we did an event at the Plaza Library, bringing together different people, including Ms. Calvert, the president of the League of Women Voters, or maybe it was your colleague. Anyway, the League of Women Voters and their expertise, and a few other voting advocates who just had information for people about what they needed to know. We tried to put voting in historical context, what voter suppression might have looked like in the Civil War era and at the beginning of the 20th century during the Pendergast years, when there was when people actually lost their lives and there were overt threats to people voting. And in the context of what we're seeing today, some of the allegations of voter suppression and changes in voting laws that put up barriers to the broad electorate voting. And then we did two events at branch libraries, at the Bluford branch and at the Northeast branch, where our hope was to put information into people's hands, very specific information about resources available to them that spelled out the new Missouri voting law, which has a lot of changes in it that are much more restrictive than previous laws in terms of the ID and ID that you need, and in terms of groups like the League that register people to vote. We didn't have a lot of success getting people to those, and I think that was one of the lessons that here at Public Media we're trying to reach undercovered communities, and a lot of those communities are people who aren't familiar with public media, and that's a challenge for us because a lot of our outreach has to do with people that we reach out to through social media, Facebook pages, neighborhood groups, that kind of thing. And on our airwaves, and that is self-selecting by definition. So we feel like we're chipping away at that effort to get people resources and information they need who aren't familiar or connected to public media. And so those library events, I think, were very important in just getting out there the idea that the public media station, the public radio, public media is interested in helping people, serving communities that lack resources. And to that end, on our website, again, this is a challenge because nobody goes to our website if they're not familiar with KCUR, but we do have a whole bunch of different resources. There's a drop down for election 2022. There are very comprehensive voter guides for both Kansas and Missouri. There's a thorough explainer and outline of what to do in regard to judges in both Kansas and Missouri, which is something that I think most of us have no clue about. When we see those names of judges, we don't know who they are or that kind of thing. So this is a very good explainer about how they get selected and what you need to know to vote on them, from down through the major elections, governor, senator, congressional districts, and then questions on the ballot. Both Kansas and Missouri have a number of questions. Some of them are a little bit complicated and the explanations are obtuse. So we have in those voter guides a number of explainers about what the questions are, what the implications are, what it will change, what has been previously said about it. And then there are a number of FAQs, or frequently asked questions, that are just bullet points of stuff that you can learn about these different issues. So sorry for rambling on, but that's the beginning of what we would like to provide and serve communities with.
I guess I'm up next. Hello, everybody. I'm Joseph. I'm a junior at William Jewell, and I'm studying voter education and voter suppression in Kansas City. And I'm here essentially to provide a perspective from someone who's a new Missouri voter and someone who has to vote absentee. I live in Springfield, but I'm obviously here in Kansas City during will all be here for the November 8th election. So in my professional sphere is essentially college students. So my perspective is that motivation to vote in my age demographic is pretty polarized. I have a lot of friends who really are motivated to go out and vote, but then I have some who are equally as smart and educated, but don't really care. And so what I'd like to do is to learn as much as I can about the voting process in Missouri and use that information to explain to them why it's an important process and why everybody should kind of take advantage of it. And so to do that, I'm working with Ms. Garman and learning more about voting in Missouri. Thank you.
Well, I'll go next. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Jenny, for the invitation. My name is Christy Moreno. The Community Advocacy and Impact Officer for Revolución Educativa, and I also partner with my colleagues over at the Latinx Education Collaborative. We're sister affiliate nonprofit organizations advocating for the advancement of the educational experience of Latino students and Latino educators and their families as well. Voter engagement is certainly one of our top initiatives right now, knowing that Latino demographics are fast and growing. It's the fastest growing subgroup, not only in our area, but nationwide. And we know that the disengagement of our potential voters is very real to us. We do a lot of grassroots work talking to our constituents, whether it's parents, whether it's, we start at high school, right? High school students that are getting registered, getting ready to be registered to vote. The reality is that the Latino voters are they're untapped, right? And so our job is to ensure the Latino voice, the Latino perspective, as diverse as it is represented in every single space where decisions are being made regarding our experience, regarding our present and our future. And that is just one of the initiatives that Revolución Educativa has taken on. We've been actively participating in voter engagement, voter education opportunities. Every time we table whatever event it is, we serve also as deputy registrars. We're out there really inviting those who are eligible to vote, to register to vote, and to really find those resources that they need to start engaging in this civic process. So that is who we are. That is what we do. There's a variety of programs that we have. We have RevEdKC, which is a hotline completely in Spanish and serving Spanish-speaking families and constituencies regarding the educational experience of our families and our students. But the reality is that we receive all types of calls because we know that the social determinants of education are everywhere. It's everything from civic engagement to health to housing. And so it is really a pleasure to engage actively with our families, with our peers, with our neighbors. We also work and really do an effort to be in conversations regarding statewide policy that affects both negatively and positively the Latino communities here in the state of Missouri. And so we're part of several statewide coalitions throughout the legislative session. We're very present at the state capitol in Jefferson City, making sure that Latino voices, the Latino rights, and the needs are being heard, are being met, and that we're engaging and effectively representing Latinos in the state of Missouri. It is a pleasure also to have been partnering with the Kansas City Library as well as with the League of Women Voters. We hosted I think it was 2 weeks ago, right, Jenny, an event at the Northeast Library. Providing language access is one of the key barriers that is being unmet, right? Language access to our Spanish-speaking families and people here is very important, and we know it is a civil right, and so we push for all organizations, public entities and agencies to really be providing all information in a Spanish language, because it's Spanish is the preferred language of many of our families and just people here in the state. So I could go on and on and on about everything we're doing at Revolución Educativa. It's very exciting. Ultimately, we're committed to increasing representation of Latino voices and also to increasing just the quality of public education, specifically serving our Latino students, our limited English proficient families, our English language learners, and also our immigrant and refugee communities as well. So I'll pass it on to, I don't know who's going to be. Have we all? Anne, I think, right?
That's right.
Anne
Sure.
or Allison?
Sure, I can go next. I'm Ann Calvert. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Kansas City, Jackson, Clay, and Platte counties. And we're a nonpartisan, nonprofit voter education organization. We do voter registration. We do, right now, we're doing tons of get out the vote. And in answer to the question that you posed, Jenny, what are we hearing? I can tell you what we're hearing as we go door to door and as we stand outside concert venues and as we visit with voters at the city market, that one thing we're hearing is that people don't know that the ID laws have changed. So we're very concerned about that. The second half of your question was what's on our minds, and that's very much on our minds, that people may show up at the polls and not have the right ID and be caught off guard by that. We're also hearing some doubt about the integrity of the elections, and that speaks to the topic of this webinar, that people are hearing misinformation, disinformation, and so that's on our minds as well. We are in the middle of a study on election integrity, and so we've put together some materials that are on our website that have to do with election integrity. We also have tons of information about voter ID, voter registration, and all that, but I know that we'll be talking about the voter guides and our other resources later. So so that's who we are. Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Allison, you're
I
up.
think that I'm last. Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Allison Dekanovich. It's great to be a part of this panel and be a part of everyone who's doing really amazing work in the community. I am the service journalism desk editor at the Kansas City Star. We are a relatively new team, and our whole focus is working on being more directly responsive to what people in our community want to know. So we do a lot of stories that are directly driven by questions from our readers and from people in the city about a lot of things. And we have focused a lot on the election, both for the primary and for this general election, asking people what they want to hear candidates talking about, and also what questions they have about voting. Really trying to focus on how we can better serve readers who care about our community and are interested in participating in our democracy, but maybe for a million reasons aren't following daily political news coverage. So how can we better meet folks where they are and get information that is actually helpful? So we have heard from hundreds of readers over the past few months about things that are on their minds. And we've been hearing that, as a few people have mentioned, like rising costs of living in general feel really pressing. So not only just inflation, but rising costs of utilities, of housing, of property taxes. We have heard some questions about if people's votes are safe and secure. We've heard a lot of questions around abortion and reproductive health care, and also Medicaid. That's more so on the Kansas side. And people care a lot about education, schools, climate change, marijuana, and housing and homelessness. Those are, I just had a list that I was rattling down, the top things we've heard about. So yeah, we've been thinking a lot about how we can connect the elections to what issues people care about most, and how we can use information to make it easier to vote. I think we'll talk more about what those efforts have looked like in a bit, but really happy to be here.
Thank you so very much. Thank you, all of you. It's still such a joy to get to be with you today. And we are going to cover a lot of really great material here. Let's jump in and talk a little bit about the plan today. Now that you've met the fabulous panelists, relative to Media Literacy Week and this action focus, we want you to be vote ready, #vote ready, right? We're going to talk about how you can review your sample ballot, research candidates and issues using reliable resources, learn how local voter guides were developed and where you can find them. We're going to help you guard against misinformation and disinformation regarding elections. And at the very end, we're going to help you make your voting plan, and remember to bring your photo ID to vote, but there'll also be more about that. So without further ado, let's jump into finding your sample ballot and researching candidates and issues. Bam, look at this. There's so many things, so many different options that you have right here. Finding your sample ballot, you can, you have a variety of choices. You can go on the left-hand side of the screen there's Ballotpedia, there's Ballot Ready, there's Vote 411. You can find your sample ballot that way. You can also go to your local election authority, and in our libraries district, we have two election authorities. We have Jackson County and we have the Kansas City Board of Election Commissioners. All of these sites are nonpartisan and have different utilities. I appreciate, for example, that Ballotpedia breaks down what the yes vote means, what the no vote means. Vote 411 tells you right away that at my library's address, there are 39 races to be considering. That's a lot. There's a lot on this ballot. This is an important election. Ballot Ready can provide information in multiple languages, and your local election authorities are the ones who will be able to get you your voter status. Are you registered? And help you find that sample ballot and also your polling location. So all great ways to do that. So you have your sample ballot. You've looked at it. You've looked at some of the information that's related to it. And maybe you've started reviewing and you want to dig a little deeper. Well, I'm no genius. Albert Einstein certainly was. And what he would tell you is the one thing you absolutely have to know is the location of the library. This is a picture of our beautiful central library right there. And on the right-hand side of the screen is a really small snapshot of our library's voter information page. This page is a labor of love. It really truly is. And a lot of teamwork within the library, but also with community partners. You can see I've highlighted Ballotpedia, we've highlighted Vote 411, but when you want to dig a little deeper, some of the organizations I like are PolitiFact, and they even have a special Missouri edition of PolitiFact, but also factcheck.org. So yeah, these are really great places to get started if you want to dig a little deeper in a story you've read or that somebody shared with you. And if you had a chance to be at the library for Ari Fleischer's Can We Trust Mainstream Media event, or you watch that recording, you know that one of his pieces of guidance is to use your common sense when you're reviewing news stories. And I really appreciate that. And we've talked a little bit about PolitiFact and about factcheck.org. News Literacy Project is an organization I lean on for their expertise. And this is their guidance. This one pager right here that's snapshotted off to the right, that's going to be in the resource list that you'll get in a follow-up email. But let's talk a little bit about what they say. There's common sense, and then there's, hey, let's jump in here and do a quick search. It's so easy to say, just Google it. But the News Literacy Project also has a resource called Google Like a Pro. And they work with Cindy Otis, who's a fantastic author about misinformation and disinformation and how to push back on that. Looking for standards. We're talking with local journalists today, and thank you so much for being with us. You're going to hear about some of the standards they apply as reporters, as editors, and they have to include fairness, accuracy, and independence as part of their everyday professional lives. Checking for transparency. What does that look like? Well, you should be able to follow in a news article who said what, the who, what, when, where, why of the story, and easily check who owns the news outlet, who funds the news outlet. And Laura even talked about that already a little bit. Examining how errors are handled. This is important because when you're a standards-based journalist, we know that we all make mistakes. Even outstanding reporters, we make mistakes. How do you then correct those mistakes? You should be able to find the evidence of how the news outlet says, yep, we made a mistake, and here's how we correct this. Here's how we clarified that. The last part here, assessing news coverage. This is something, it's kind of a gentle reminder that if you're only getting your news from one source, maybe you need to broaden your search just a little bit. Consider extending your search for news stories, consider extending the news outlets that you review. And one way you can assess that is kind of in this one-stop shop here. It's allsides.com. And they, I want to just bring your attention to the fact that they have a 2022 section for what's happening right here. And I love how they're highlighting just how important this midterm election is. All 435 seats in the House of Representatives are up. I mean, that's quite something. And not only that, this is going to be the first election involving the post 2020 US Census redistricting. At the bottom part here, you can see another quick snapshot of what they do. You have the same story, but in one place you can see here's how it looks on as portrayed by a left-leaning news outlet, a right-leaning news outlet, and a news outlet that's considered in the center. I hope you can read that. But part of the reason I love talking about this right now is that we all feel like we're in the same boat. Whether you're Democrat or Republican, 8 out of 10 of us think that democracy is going to be destroyed if the other side wins. And it just doesn't have to be that way. It really doesn't. So we talked about broadening the search, looking for reliable resources. And this is a great spot to highlight how the federal government plays a role in supporting local and state election offices. This is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. I hope you'll understand I'll call them CISA from now on because that's a mouthful. They lead efforts to manage cyber risks. Anne was just talking about some concerns about is this going to be safe? Well, CISA leads those the efforts to manage those risks at the national level, and they share that information, provide resource to local, state, and tribal levels of government. They have a misinformation, disinformation, malinformation resource library. It's phenomenal, and they even have a section of that dedicated just to elections. And on this alert right here, which you'll also have in that resource list, they're basically reminding people that, hey, you can avoid amplifying misinformation by doing a simple check, by doing a simple check of the source. And if you can't find a second reliable source, just don't share the story. They also advise that you can find reliable information about registering to vote, voting, and election results from your state and local government election officials. Hey, maybe you're wondering, how do I find those people? Have you ever heard of the National Association of State Election Directors? I had not until I paid attention to this News Literacy Project webinar, where they highlight this organization and their partnership with the National Association for Media Literacy Education. This is another one-pager I really like because I think we can all acknowledge there's so much information. How do we make it more easily digestible? How do we make it more easily accessible to people? And this is one way that they can do this. This on the one-pager that they have right here that they work with NAMLE about is, what do you do? Like, we know from the 2020 election, there were so many videos, so many images of this is wrong, something's happening at this place. And this is their guidance for, well, what can you do? The one in the lower right-hand corner there is one of my favorites, about using available tools to identify the origin of the content, because I've pulled together lots of those resources for you to use on the library's critical thinking and fact-finding page. And I hope you would have fun trying that out, or even asking for help if you need it. This is your reminder. We're talking again about where you can find reliable information about elections, about voting. It's your local election authority. And right here in Kansas City, Jackson County Election Board, Kansas City Board of Elections. So before we move on from this section, I just wanted to check in with our panelists and say, do you have anything that you'd like to add? Anything that you'd want to highlight?
I will say one thing. Sorry. Did somebody go ahead, Michelle?
It's okay. No, I was going to say this is all great information. I would add that the Secretary of State's office is a great place to find information about not only where to get your ballot, ID laws and changes, but also just general information about what has occurred with elections. How many people voted? How many Democrats voted? How did people across counties and jurisdictions vote? And so your Missouri Secretary of State is an executive level statewide office that is charged with, the only executive branch of that office that is charged with maintaining voter election and data information. And so making sure you stop by your Secretary of State's office or call in the Secretary of State's office if you have questions or issues is a good place to go. We have a branch of the Secretary of State's office right here in Kansas City and downtown. And so that's another resource if you're finding yourself having issues or need help getting connected to the information related to elections and voting in Kansas.
Thank you, Michelle. That's excellent. I definitely have that in the resource list, but I appreciate you calling it out right here. Thank you.
Let me just say to Michelle's point, and I don't want to put too fine a point on this, but the Secretary of State is a partisan office, and sometimes I would say not infrequently, they're interested in promoting the laws that have been passed. And in this particular voting law, and Anne can speak to this even better than I can, there's a lot of ambiguity and confusion in some of the language. So that just speaks to what we've been talking about in terms of checking a variety of sources. I know the KCUR voter guides, when they talk about particularly the ballot issues and even some of the pieces about the elections, it goes into, you know, this is what the law says, this is what it changes, this is the history, this is why the legislature passed this. And we have to keep in mind that the legislature has a supermajority of Republicans and very conservative legislators, lawmakers, and you want to check a number of different sources so that you get context about what the Secretary of State's website says, because that's going to lay out, this is what the law says. And like I say, Anne can speak to this probably better than I can, but you know, there are provisions in that law that you would not understand necessarily, or terms that are vague, such as soliciting voters, that kind of thing. What does that mean? And I just do also want to say that KCUR, and to Christy's point, a number of other resources have our voter guides in Spanish as well. So that's just all by way of saying, don't just rely on one source.
No, check and verify. And to put an even finer point on Laura's comment, the Secretary of State is an elected partisan office, but the overall branch or that department or the elections department within the Secretary of State's office is not partisan. So they're supposed to provide you the basic information on the laws that have been passed and the information related to elections. So you have to take the credible basic information and couple it with organizations, as Jenny has mentioned, who have done the work to synthesize and analyze what's going on so that you have all the information needed to make an informed.
That is so great, because we were just going to talk about voter guides, because that's a lot of work. What we're talking about, all of this research, all of this delving into your ballot. So have I got a deal for you? And I do want to mention too, the Kansas City Beacon also shared a voter guide. I'm just really tickled to be able to share with our listeners, with our viewers today, the Kansas City Stars, the KCURs, and League of Women Voters voter guides right here. So take it away, Allison.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, and thanks for highlighting all of those excellent resources. They're definitely a tool to use even when you are looking at things from a news organization. Like you said, hopefully you can look at where, in all of our stories, you should see where something's sourced from, who told us what. But it's always helpful to take things one step further and corroborate them with other sources or verify as much to make you feel as confident as possible. So all of us are making choices all the time, even when we're deciding what to include and how to include it. And so it's best to always extend that research. Our voter guides, I'm dropping a link in the chat right now to the landing page with them. This Missouri one that's on the screen includes all of the candidates that are on the ballot in the Kansas City area. So in Jackson, Clay, and Platte counties. We sent out candidate surveys to all of the candidates on the ballot with questions that we heard from readers, so about those topics that I had listed before. And then what we did is these voter guides are really straight from the candidates. So it's actually a great time to utilize some of that fact checking that you talked about, because the point of this is we wanted to really make it easy to connect what the candidates are saying to what voters are hearing. So we published the responses directly as the candidates gave them to us. So usually when we are reporting, anytime we quote something that's like contextualized within a whole thing, but these are directly the candidates' words. You can hear exactly what they are campaigning for yourself. But they are not fact checked in the same way that everything is. So a candidate's response is the candidate's response. And we thought that that is helpful to hear directly from the candidate, but it's not necessarily fact checked. So we have that in like big letters at the top, but it's good to just know that these are the candidates' direct responses. So we have responses for the federal positions, for US Senator, for all the House of Representatives, for the state auditor, for the state legislature representatives, for all the districts in Jackson County. And then we go all the way down to the county level. So Jackson County Legislature, Platte County Presiding Commissioner, Clay County Legislature, and or Clay County Commission. And then I guess I just also, and like Jenny, I don't know if Jenny mentioned this or not, but we sourced the questions from readers online, but we also had the wonderful opportunity to partner with Jenny over the summer and other folks in the community. So we were tabling at different community centers and had posters with QR codes at places around town and the library to create as many opportunities as possible to hear from different folks about what questions they had. And so in addition to the candidate surveys, we also have stories breaking down what the new voting law means, how early voting is working now for everyone in Missouri, where you can early vote, what those hours are. And we spent a lot of time focusing on not just the candidates this race, but also the ballot questions, because at least in Missouri, there's 5 questions on the ballot that every voter will have the chance to weigh in on. And then here in Kansas City, there's 2 additional questions at the city level. And so I guess I would just encourage everyone to we have resources, but I'm sure so many people on this call also have resources, but to learn about those ballot questions, because that's kind of where a lot of the action is taking place for this November election. Is there anything else, Jenny, that you wanted me to speak on?
No, I think that's great. Just kind of sharing how it was developed, how you worked this out. And I'll
yeah. So it was created with questions from readers, and then we created a survey from that we sent directly to the candidates. They got us their responses. These are their exact words. I could have just said that.
That's all good. And I would just say too, you mentioned the ballot measures. There's a link in the resource guide that you'll get in the follow-up email to a recording of the League of Women Voters presentation about the ballot measures, like how they started, and and what you'll find on your ballot. This sort of the backstory and everything like that. It was a great joy to get to work with the League on that too. So thank you, Allison. Thanks for sharing that. And we are moving on to KCUR's voter guide. I know, Laura, you talked a little bit about this. Would you mind talking a little bit about how you developed this?
Not at all.
Thanks.
I'm also putting in this says to hosts and panelists. So do people on the webinar get to see the chat or not? I just put a link to our election drop down that has both the Kansas and Missouri complete voter guides that you can access. And a lot of it will be redundant in what Allison said, but I would encourage people to go there because we have a little bit of a different approach. Most of the election stuff is also in Spanish, so we're proud of that and we don't have much penetration in the Latino community, but we're hoping to increase that. So we're proud to have a lot of the content in Spanish. But the way we came about the voter guides was, again, through our community engagement. We have convened a group called Your Voice, which we put out a request for people to apply to be part of a citizens agenda group, basically, that we've been meeting with since June, once a month, to help guide our coverage. Basically, what are people thinking about? What do we need to cover? Knowing that we couldn't do every race given the resources that we have. So we got a cross section of political perspectives. We're about half conservatives, half liberal. We have demographic variety, ethnic, racial, education, age. So it's a pretty authentic reflection of the metro area. And we've been asking them, what are you hearing in your communities? What do we need to know? What are we getting wrong? What is the media? You know, there is a lot of general mistrust of the media. So we're trying to circumvent some of that by going right to people and asking them. And we've done the same in the listening sessions that we've had around the community and the event at the library and in the branches. We've done a lot of that too. And also just reaching out on social media to ask people what we're missing, what we're getting wrong, what they want to hear about. And once we have using that information, as well as sort of brainstorming in our own newsroom and assessing what resources we have, as I mentioned before, the complete Missouri and Kansas voter guides that basically go is the same as the Star, I think, is doing all of the major national races, you know, the governor's race, the Senate races, the House district races, and different reporters have done sort of profiles of those races. And the way we've approached those radio and digital stories is not necessarily to try and talk about the horse race, you know, who's ahead, who's not ahead, but to get sort of a backdoor sense about what are the main issues in the election that are driving the campaigns. And that sort of speaks to trying to address the hyperpartisanship of the climate, the political climate, trying to understand who's funding what races and what candidates. A lot of it just standard reporting, but again, trying to sort of go beyond just who the candidates are and how they're doing in the race to what's at issue, you know, what's at stake. For example, we just did a story about one of the Northland house races, and what we talked about there was how hard it is for a first-time candidate who has 2 other jobs to get her message out, you know, to get their message out. The voter guides, so that's kind of what we've been doing with the candidates, and we have select state house, Senate, and House candidates. Again, the amendments that are the ballot issues both in Kansas and Missouri. And I would echo what Allison said. One of the things that we've heard in our community meetings was that people really pay less attention to those down ballot races, and they most closely have an effect on people's lives, and people just don't realize that. So that's, you know, basically I would just encourage people to check the drop down in the voter guides, and it goes into pretty much detail about the ballot issues and the questions specific to Kansas City, Missouri.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks so much. I agree with you. These close to home elections are most impactful. Thank you. And Anne, I'm going to have you share a little bit about the Vote 411 voter guide.
Sure. And I'm just going to concentrate on the things that are a little bit different about ours, partly for time, but we actually invite the candidates to go directly to, they can actually log in directly and enter their own information. We do also ask questions, and then we print their answers as they answer or don't answer, which can be helpful. Another feature of Vote 411 is that you can type in your address and you get the exact ballot where you live. So it's a little bit more, I'm not sure if the election board gets quite that specific, but then you can also make your selections right on our website and email your choices to yourself or print them out, so you can take that to the polls with you when you go to vote, and it makes it a whole lot faster. You just go doop, doop, doop. So I'm voting for. And then we also reformat it every 2 years. We do the voter guide for every big election, but then we also do, thank you, Jenny, if you'll hold that up again. I actually passed all mine out, so I don't have one, but
I was just reminding everybody that you can pick up a voter guide at your local library. Thanks to the League of Women Voters, appreciate that.
yep,
Yeah.
that we do print it every 2 years for the major elections in November. So we've got 13,000 of them out there in the world. So you can go pick one of those up at your, as you said, at your local libraries. And online, we do also have ours in English and in Spanish.
That's awesome. Thank you so very much. I really appreciate that. This is a lot of hard work that gets poured into all of this, and I'm really grateful to all of you for that. So we're going to step forward here on guard, because we really want you to be prepared to guard against mis and disinformation. And we know that one thing we can count on is that there will be. We just know this is like a definite thing. This is going to happen. It's going to be out there in the wild, the misinformation, the disinformation. CISA has been monitoring this. They've sent out the alert that foreign actors may intensify their efforts to mess around with our 2022 midterm elections. And they're going to do this in a variety of ways, but their ultimate goal is to undermine our confidence in in the legitimacy of our election systems. So be on guard right here. But it's also not just about foreign, it's also stuff that happens right here at home, and it can come from a variety of places. And the results are dire. This is from one of the News Literacy Project's webinars, and you can see some examples there in the bottom right-hand corner. But the results of election misinformation, when unchecked, are really dire. You have suppressed voting, you have confused voters, you have misled voters, you have voters who think, well, this doesn't make sense. This isn't real. And don't you just kind of, and we realize too that this can come from all sorts of directions here at home. And you might just be asking yourself, why would we do this? I had the pleasure of tuning into an Aspen Digital webinar kind of about what you need to know about the upcoming election. And a group called Democracy Forward, they basically shared enraged, engaged, and donating. That's the motivation of partisan intervention. So all of this not to worry you, but just to say, please keep your guard up. The News Literacy Project also identified 3 election rumors to avoid. They've been tracking this stuff since 2020, much longer, I think, even than that. But one of these rumors that I thought was relevant for Kansas City was poll worker rumors, like what we were talking about, some of the footage and the pictures that were put out on social media saying some bad things are happening. And I really just want to say, poll workers are from our own community. We can't have polling locations if we don't have poll workers. So I want to just do a quick shout out. Thank you, poll workers. Thank you. This is such a pivotal role that you play, and I'm really, really grateful to you. But if you have questions, if you see misinformation or disinformation about what's happening at polling places, you know where you can go. You're going to go to your local election authority and say, please help me understand what's going on. And so we talked a little bit as we started here about questions about election security. And you mentioned that's one of the things that you've been hearing when you go door to door. And I just want to say, if you know already, you're not alone if you have questions about election security. The Reboot Foundation conducted a survey just last month, so that'll be September 2022. Only 28% of the people that they surveyed felt confident, very confident in their ability to spot and stop misinformation about election security. And the gathering that we're having right here, right now, is really meant to, again, to kind of help you defeat that frustration and those concerns with what they're calling pre-bunking. Hey, here's what you can expect to see out there in the wild. Here's what you can expect to come at you for misinformation and disinformation. And you know who your reliable sources are. You know who the definitive sources are for those answers. And we really also wanted to share, you've seen that too, the interconnectedness of the federal, the state, the local, the tribal levels of government, and ensuring our election security. And Michelle, I appreciate you calling out the Secretary of State's office. This is a snapshot right here from the Secretary of State's website, talking about how our elections in Missouri are secure, all these different things. And I'll just go through some of them. Like we've talked a little bit about, oh, our election systems could be hacked. Nope, they really can't. They're not connected to the internet. There's not going to be a hack of our election systems. There is no single voting system in Missouri. Each of the 116 election jurisdictions in Missouri has their very own. So there's no way for that to be weak like that. I'm just going to highlight that when absentee ballots are processed, they're counted by a bipartisan team. One thing I wanted to call out too, that voting machines are publicly tested before and after Election Day. October 31st is your opportunity in Kansas City to observe that public testing, and you can find out more at kceb.org. And I just would say too, like that last little part there, all voting machines in Missouri are required to give the voter a second chance just to make sure that they've marked their ballot correctly. Like, did I mark that the way I thought I did? You can check, you can know. And I realize that we're running a little bit short on time. This has been such a great conversation. But I do want to pause really quick in case there's any insights or anything anybody would like to add before we jump into the new election law. And don't forget, if you have questions while you're watching, the Q&A section is exactly where you can go to put that. And if we don't get to your question today, we'll get it answered in that follow-up email. All right.
Just quickly, I would just say that you can call your local election board if you do have questions about their voting process. They want you to know that it's secure. Or you could ask the STAR or anyone else here. We look into reader questions about voter security, or if they think they're being scammed about their vote. But the local election boards are great resources.
That's awesome. Thank you very much.
Also, I would like to commend the work that the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition has been doing in spreading information. Also, for me, really the emphasis is in providing the information in Spanish. And so look them up in many languages, actually, but they're there to protect and to support voters with any question regarding the safety and security of their vote.
Thank you. Thanks. I appreciate that. That's a great addition. Great. So we're going to jump into the new election law. Here we go. This is a big change for voters in Missouri. And I think we are all understanding that everybody's sort of creatures of habits, and maybe they haven't realized, wow, things have changed. They have changed. And the biggest change that I've seen is that you have to now have a valid government issued photo ID. Has to be state issued, federally issued, and it needs to be current. I really want to draw your attention to that little asterisk right there too, that if it is expired after the most recent general election, which was the 3rd of November, 2020, that's still going to be okay. That will still be considered accepted. But still, this is a big barrier for some people. And we really want to kind of foot stomp. This is happening. Please be aware. Please be ready. But a bonus with the new election law is that we have early voting. It's already started October 25th. And these are the locations in the Kansas City jurisdiction where you can go. If you're voting at the satellite locations, the election board really wants you to understand you're not going to have that pre-printed standard paper ballot. You're going to be voting on a ballot marking device that will produce a paper ballot. And you can't vote with a provisional ballot for early voting. So you must have that acceptable form of ID. So this, one of my favorite things, actually, part of my job at the library, is that I get to work with the Kansas City Election Board's outreach and education and training outreach supervisor. And I can just tell you that joy comes from working with her and her dedication to her work and to collaborating. They provide these brochures that I'm sharing with you right now. This first one is your voting plan. And I have those with me when I'm out and about in the community. It's basically a blueprint for your election day. How do I know that I'm ready to rock and roll here? You have all of this checked off, you're ready to rock and roll. And it's a reminder right here about on election day, if you didn't have your registered voter, but you don't have an accepted form of ID, you can still vote. You can vote with that provisional ballot. And then I also really like these brochures right here. These are two separate brochures, one for incarcerated voters and one registering to vote and voting while you're experiencing houselessness. These are just very important brochures, very important information for people to have. And we're doing pretty good, I think, for time, but this is our question and answer slide right here. I wanted to, while I'm looking at the Q&A section right here, this is a great time for anybody to just pipe in and say what might be on your mind or questions that you might still have. Oh, I have a question for Kansas City Star and for KCUR. How do you as journalists dig deeper when you want to know more about a story or what you're hearing about, and how do you recommend that voters dig deeper on issues?
I'll start. One thing is check a variety of different sources. As we've heard a number of times, don't just go by one account of a candidate's positions on things. There are ways to check on, if we're talking about candidates, for example, there are ways to check on a candidate's background. You check their LinkedIn, you check if they've had bankruptcies, you check criminal records. Those, to see who that person is. I mean, it's just, that's basically what you're doing. You're trying to find out who really this person is beyond their stump speeches and what they put out on their campaign rhetoric. I think in terms of the ballot issues, some of them, as I said earlier, maybe most affect your life even more than some of the national campaigns. You look at the history of what an amendment is trying to do. What did it say before? I will say again, to underscore that some of these are complicated. It's kind of hard to understand the language, and a lot of them are written in balladese, sort of political speak that is hard for us to understand. So for the regular person. So I think as a voter, you want to Google some of these issues and what they're trying to do. For example, the police funding thing. There's and try and look what other media, do a search of a lot of the different media on some of these issues. This issue of police funding, whether is one of the ballot issues, whether and the state is voting on this, which has raised a lot of controversy, because how do people in Springfield know how the Kansas City, Missouri government should fund its police, or what the role of the police is? Anyway, look at what other press has said about different issues. Try and find out the history of a certain issue. Talk to people who you think will have influence on that, and get all kinds of feedback about what the implications and impact of a certain ballot issue or a candidate's position are going to be.
That's great, Laura. Thank you very much. And I just wanted to draw your attention. I know sometimes the chat doesn't show up for everybody, especially in a recording. Anne brought up in the chat Vote Writers, a national nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that helps people with photo IDs for voting. And also, if I remember right, they also help with actually transportation to voting locations. And Vote Writers is included.
No, sorry, I'll correct.
No,
they don't. But they will actually pay for an Uber if you need to go to the DMV to get your ID, which may be the confusion. Okay. So no, they're strictly helping people to get IDs.
That's great. That's great. Thank you very much, Anne. And we're closing things out here right at 1 o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording shortly, except to say thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you, the amazing panelists. Thank you so much. Thank you to those of you attending. This is how you can contact me if you're watching this recording and you'd like the resources that we've mentioned. But truly, thank you so much to all of you for being with us today and for spending your time with us.
Thanks for having us.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.